Hello, everybody, and you are all very welcome along to tonight's webinar, the Digital Horticulture Consumer. I'm Conor Gallina. I'm the Horticulture Advisor in Ornamentals. And a few housekeeping rules before we get started. The webinar will be recorded and it will be available to use after the webinar has been finished. It'll be available on the CAFRE YouTube channel, and I will send you out a link as well. All attendees are muted and the cameras are turned off as well. And if you have any questions, please use the Q&A section along the right-hand side to put in your questions, and we will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation Natalie's given to us tonight. I would like to welcome Natalie to this webinar tonight, and thanks for joining us. She'll be giving us an insight into how horticulture consumers are using social media and the digital world. And I watched a recent video she did for the ICL Hort Science online webinars, and I found it very informative and insightful. So I'm hoping you'll get something out of tonight's webinar and see what is happening in regards to horticulture and consumer trends. I will now hand you over to Natalie, and she will start the webinar, and I hope you enjoy it, and we'll talk to you afterwards.
Thank you, Conor. Yes, as Conor says, I'm Natalie Porter. My family run a bedding plant nursery on the northwest coast of England, just north of Liverpool. I am in a business development marketing kind of role in that business, as part of which I have, a vested interest, but also a personal fascination with consumer behaviour. This has been something that I've studied before the pandemic, but it's something that my interest in has increased even more since, and hopefully I can provide a whistle-stop tour of what I've learned and what I think is happening to our consumers in our industry as a result of both digital technology and the pandemic itself. So first of all, I want to quickly touch on the things we already needed to consider to engage with future consumers. Then we'll move on to how the virus has affected the consumer that we knew before, the ones that we could bank on. And then the consumers that lockdown has inspired or accelerated into gardening, those lockdown gardeners that we're also keen to keep hold of. And how can we use these considerations to evolve our businesses and collectively to evolve the whole industry? So starting with the things we already needed to consider. I believe that gardening as an inherited hobby has been diminished by the influences of technology. This is the idea that children for the past, I think anybody under 30 basically has had a choice between green time in the garden with grandparents or parents and screen time on Facebook, Instagram, etc. And I think one of those options has been winning out far too often. Brand horticulture, as we know it, relies heavily on consumers aging into its relevant demographic. So our industry basically waits for people to age into gardening and, armed with nostalgia and happy memories from the time in the garden with younger times in the garden with family. Most people will generally find their way back into gardening. But what can we do when they never had the exposure in the first place to fall back upon? The paths have been rerouted, and I don't think we could anymore bank on people waking up one day and wanting to plant rhododendrons the way that was quite reliable before. Younger generations have only ever lived in a world where they are a blue dot on a map around which their entire existence revolves. This blue dot consumer was my priority focus before COVID. If they wanted a pizza, they pressed a button on their phone and the pizza drove to the blue dot. If they wanted an Uber, they pressed a button on the phone and the car arrived at the blue dot to collect them. Almost every product or piece of information they could ever possibly need is available direct to the doorstep. It's not a case of drive down to Blockbuster and see if Back to the Future 2 is available or if Ken down the road's already rented it out. It's there, it's on your screen, it's on Netflix, it's on Amazon Prime, whatever it is. And it's that instant gratification that they're used to. Because of that, they tend to only spend time in physical stores if it's an experiential visit or an Instagrammable moment. I saw a speaker a few years ago, a guy called Ken Hughes, Irish himself actually, and he was phenomenal. He spoke about restaurants in New York that were parachuting sandwiches out of the window because people were more likely to use them than the bloke up the road that just delivered them on the back of a bike. And it's that sort of novelty, shareable experience that is bringing that person away from the house at all. They only leave the house for an experience. And as we mentioned on the last slide, that person likely had no previous exposure to gardening on any significant level because their life had been screen time, not green time. So I was trying to come up with ways and ideas and formats that would appeal to this person, and then the virus moved the goalpost anyway, so all a little bit incidental now. So having focused on the one Blue Dot consumer pre-COVID, I, for the purposes of this presentation and in general, have focused on three in the intermediate time. So first of all, looking at our regular pre-COVID consumer, I think we would all agree generally towards the silver citizen side of things. For them, social distancing has inhibited the social element of their garden centre visits. A lot of them would have gone for a cup of tea, meet a friend, you know, an afternoon tea. There was a very social element to garden centres for this generation. 57% of over 65 surveyed said they did not yet feel safe to visit physical stores for non-essential items. 80% of 50 to 7-year-olds said that they now use garden centre websites. My granddad's the same. He physically had to learn to use online shopping, which is something he would never have entertained before, because the only way he could safely access food was to order it online. 70% of over 70s now consider themselves confident to use the internet to order goods for delivery. It's quite a shift in how they behave and how they are able to use the internet to their advantage. So I've called them the evolved elderly. Then we move on to the sort of two lockdown gardeners, if you like, and I do think it is worth splitting them down further than just young people. I think that's something that we've all been guilty of in the past, but I do think now that they represent such a significant portion of our industry, that they deserve a more individualized identity, because I think there are a lot of different subgroups within those divisions. So starting with the person who before was, I would have called the house proud hincher. Not sure if any of you will know about hinchers, but there's a cleaning Instagram sensation in the UK called Mrs. Hinch, and she very much tells people, I think she's got 4 million followers, and they all are very much sheep mentality, do exactly as is prescribed to them, focusing on decorating their houses, painting everything grey, using this particular cleaning product called the pink stuff, buying grey furniture, rugs and scatter cushions, decorating a house for the benefit of the shareability. You might wonder why I'm talking about cleaning products. I will get there, I promise. So this person decorated each room of their house throughout the start of lockdown until they'd run out of rooms, or perhaps the children kept ruining the decorations they were doing in the room. So they moved outdoors, and in doing so, they painted everything grey. They got scatter cushions and decorative rugs, and they used the pink stuff to clean the floor. So they basically just took everything that was prescribed to them through social media as how they were supposed to handle their house and how they were supposed to decorate their house, and used it to decorate their garden. Having never previously gardened, they didn't really know what they were supposed to be doing and what was expected of them. And this is how they found a way to hinch their gardens, if you will. A genuine real life example as well, and it's one of hundreds that I could find very quickly. I don't understand the concept of an outdoor rug, but apparently they're a thing. So the garden decorator is born. The third person that I have been looking at in my studies has been this houseplant parent. So somebody who was already interested in gardening, but on a houseplant level. They were usually time poor, so they just previously stuck to houseplants because you know any time of day you can deal with them. They don't need a lot of space, but even if they had, you know, a windowsill or a disused galley or a side path to their house, furlough has allowed them to make use of those spaces. They take caring for their plants very seriously. They see houseplants as collectibles. You know, rare plants are just crazy prices, I'm sure you've perhaps seen. They advocate sustainable practices, and they particularly appreciate the health and well-being benefits. I think we've all seen the marketing strategies used around houseplants, where it's plants to clean the air, plants to help you feel happier, etc. So the third person that we brought in is now just a plant parent rather than a houseplant parent, and they are the modern gardener. So I like to try to visualize each of these people and how they might, if we were designing a garden for them on a stereotype, how it might look. So I'll take you through each of the formats I put together. So we're looking first of all at the evolved elderly. You're looking at classic named varieties that he's had previous success with, tried and tested. We've got a perfectly mown real grass lawn. We've got a little greenhouse where he's propping his tomatoes, a white picket fence. Plants are his pride and joy. They're also his mental health. They're his daily workout, his physical workout, his emotional relief. But for the time being, might he need a click and collect and home delivery option, given that he's still reluctant to venture out into public? So is this somebody that could benefit from an online presence that a lot of centres have put into place, but wasn't previously common practice in horticulture? So not too much has changed, but perhaps we need to adapt to still be able to supply to him for the time being. If we look at the garden decorator, completely different garden. Again, everything's painted grey. There's one of those decorative rugs, scatter cushions, and the plants that are there as ornaments. And those ornaments are inexpensive and replaceable. And this season's colours, they're very, very much driven by social media recommendation. Facebook and Instagram influence this customer the most of anyone. And yeah, I think especially plants like if you look at bedding plants, things like the osteosperm and purple sun, the petunia night sky, those sort of instant wow factor plants are really going to appeal to this person, but they're not going to get their hands dirty and dig them into the ground or into a basket. They're going to buy the basket, they're going to buy a pot, and the plants are there as ornaments. If we look at the modern gardener, everything in their garden needs to be functional. The plants that clean the air, the plants that you can eat, the plants that feed the bees. And they're much more driven by sustainable credentials. In terms of where they're going online for their information, this person's more about how-to videos on YouTube, TikTok sensations, trends, and who grows the cucumber biggest, or whatever it is, competitive, boastful but sustainable gardening rather than collectability that we saw in them with houseplants. So each of them has very different approach, and each sector of horticulture needs to consider how accessible and appealing they are to each of these evolved customers. So we run a bedding plant nursery. So using bedding plants as an example, as we said with the older chap, the product doesn't need to change, just how we let him access them. If we skip across to the plant parent, the modern gardener, the bedding is never going to appeal. Bedding plants aren't particularly functional. Let's not go into that though. But the middle customer, that garden decorator, could be the ideal future bedding plant consumer. And this is why I think that's the case. They love bright colours, instant impact. They want to be able to redecorate regularly. So whether it's a 5-litre pot containing a Rudbeckia that would see you 15, 20 years if you looked after it properly, or if it's a 5-litre pot containing a Marguerite that's only going to do one season, to them it's an orange plant. It doesn't matter any more than that. So it's possibly an opportunity to escape the price compression that we've seen in the bedding plant world in particular, but I believe in all nursery supply over the last 25 years. Bedding's easy care products. They don't have an expectation that it's going to live a long time. So a low maintenance instant gardening, that replaceability again is imperative to them. So looking at this last point that I just briefly touched on, this price compression, this person doesn't have a perceived value. As I say, a 5-litre Rudbeckia could be worth £15. To them, a 5-litre Marguerite could be the same price. And we're starting to see examples of this come through in other areas of horticulture where the marketing and the channels chosen to market a product are having a significant effect on its perceived value. So if we look at a pack of seeds here, we've got £1.35 for Mr. Fothergill. It's a really good brand, 70 seeds, less than twopence a seed. Take the same seeds, decorate them like they're a chocolate bar in one of these grow bars. I think we worked out there was 15 seeds in a pack here. Little block of coir, wrapped it up in fancy paper and marketed on sites like it's not on the high street gifting site. A lot of it goes through the RHS shops, places like Anthropology, high fashion, high fashion retail. These are going for, so 15 seeds going for £12, plus up to £11 postage if you're in a hurry. And it's not just a sort of a flash in the pan. This company has built entire ranges around it. And again, as we mentioned before, it's, a gin bar, a tomato bar, a bouquet, first aid. They're all themed, conceptualized, but they are effectively 15 seeds wrapped in a tiny block of coir and in a fancy bit of paper with some nice colours on. And that markup is thousands of percent between the tuppence a seed that we were getting for a pack of 70 to £12 for 15 seeds that you're effectively getting out of this. And I do think that there are similar opportunities in all areas of horticulture, and I do think that this project moving forward relies on marketeers and digital marketing more than on horticulture itself, if you'll accept that. In terms of, we don't need to constantly be evolving and pushing for new varieties, we just possibly need to reposition what we're already doing, and just take mind of who the consumer is and how that's changed, and reconsider how we're pitching to them. And by doing so, we can hopefully create more longevity for the industry, but also perhaps a fairer living on the way through as well, which, as a bed and plant nursery, I think we would say is pretty critical. In conclusion, we just possibly need to look at improving accessibility, tailoring product ranges to the new customer that we have. And I always say that this bit's an opportunity as much as an obligation. This customer that we're talking about, the two new customers that I've introduced today, are undeniably very different from those who we've dealt with previously, but the digital revolution continues, accelerates even. They will be more like every generation that follows thereafter. And we have to take this opportunity that lockdown has suddenly made us relevant to all of these people who we probably didn't stand much chance of ever featuring in any major way in their normal lifespan. We've suddenly become relevant to so many people at the same time. We have to use that as an opportunity to catch up lost ground and get used to this new customer, because they are more like every customer that we will get thereafter, and stop relying on people aging into the customer that you knew how to deal with, because it's not going to continue to happen. And part of that, social media shareability holds a lot of value, and value-added content is likely to be more effective than obvious adverts. So these aren't the people that you can say, here's an advert for an autumn container. Here's the people that you can say, which of these do you prefer? Help us decide. Do you like the muted bronzes colour schemes or the bright and breezy colour schemes, or whatever it is? And it's just a case of, the dust's hopefully starting to settle around COVID, and seeing where your cards lie and what you can do with the new tools that have been handed to us, because I really do think that there's opportunities in this, and the silver lining of the trauma that we've experienced and continue to experience through the lockdowns is this opportunity to turn the industry into what it really has the potential to be, and can continue to have a long and secure future for horticulture that was, I think, slightly in jeopardy before. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Natalie. It was very interesting and very insightful, and definitely a lot of very good information there for people that are interested in getting onto the digital marketing and reaching new customers. Just on your own experience, and maybe just talk a little bit about Happy Plants, and how important is the digital marketing for B2B businesses and wholesale nurseries, and what have you got out of it?
I think it's something we'd always undervalued, and I think it's a really good point that I think somebody put it to me last year. When you look at the marketing for Cadbury's cream egg, it's done by Cadbury's, not Tesco. And that really sort of changed how I think about it, is that we, as the people who know the most about the product and are most directly affected by how much the product sells, we should be taking more responsibility for that side of things and finding ways, because I know a lot of people, when I say that, have said, we've made good information in the past and it doesn't make it down to the consumer. Well, we now have an opportunity to as much as the product isn't available direct to consumer, we can make the marketing materials available direct to consumer so that they can go into garden centres and say, I really want that product. We learned a lot about it last year when the garden centres over here shut down last March. After a few weeks of crying, we eventually decided to set up a local web shop just to clear some of the volume and keep enough cash coming in to pay the staff that we had, hopefully working on the nursery to grow future crops. And even just the lessons I learned through those few weeks dabbling in sort of local social media for that, we ended up gaining a wider following, even though it wasn't originally the intention, just through sharing more information and sort of like a behind the scenes look on a commercial nursery. And yeah, I think, it doesn't have to be the general advertising format, and it's almost the more relaxed you are about it, the more natural it is and interactive it is, the more effective it is. Which isn't what I would have expected. I would have sort of, if I was asked to put together a digital marketing program, it would have been programmed and, sort of, quite prescriptive and one way. This is an advert for what is available this week. This is an advert for what's available next week. And I think we've learned a lot just through our small dabble into sort of direct to consumer about making it less of an advert and more of a value content.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's something we were talking about previously as well, is there's a lot of the younger generation becoming purchasing managers for these garden centers as well. And they finish the day of work and they're back at home, and then they're going through the social medias at home and Instagram and Facebook, and they're checking out the likes of yourselves and seeing what you have available and
Yeah.
what's looking good at the moment, and I think that's very powerful as well.
Yeah, we've had big customers come on board just because of social media that we weren't even doing with that in mind. We were sharing some products that we'd put together for our local web shop. My dad is the biggest cynic or was the biggest cynic of me spending any of the time he's paying me to work on, putting together this stuff that he used to see as non-effective. But we've got to a point now that we get that many garden centre inquiries, as many garden centre inquiries as individual consumer inquiries, because they get to see the stuff that, even if it's like we have a web shop, but only the stuff that is available goes in the web shop, but all the stuff that's sold out in advance, all the best lines, they can see them on there, whereas they couldn't, they can see more about what we do rather than just a descriptive list of products available in the web shop.
Yeah. And again, just on your personal experience, what do you think is the best platform for digital marketing for yourselves for B2B businesses? Is it Facebook or the web shop or?
B2B, I would say it's probably Instagram. I think I've made it quite clear in our presentation, the demographic of the three that we think we have the most chance with is the decorator, and I think for them on a consumer level, their Facebook and Instagram, but you can definitely strike up the best conversation with them through Facebook. So yeah, I'd say Facebook and Instagram are most realistic for us as a bedding plant nursery, but those who are into sort of the fruit and veg and grow your own are found elsewhere. So it is a case of, I think you need to pick one of the new customers and focus your efforts on them, really.
And yeah, that's yeah. You kind of have to pick a platform and use it to its full advantage rather than trying to communicate in all three and not doing it very effectively, I guess.
Yeah.
And what kind of like time would you spend on doing the digital marketing? Like what kind of
It's
input would you have to do for it?
I guess it's quite difficult to quantify. I try and, I have a young child and a life outside of work sometimes, and I try and not let it absorb my evenings because it definitely can. But even like I'm walking around the nursery and I snap 10 or 15 photos of things that are really good, or just even an overshot of the nursery. It only takes an extra 3 or 4 minutes to put them, on an Instagram story or whatever it is, or once a week have, the photos of the week on Facebook. It doesn't have to be a significant investment. It can very easily become one. But I don't think I think we spoke with Michael Perry, who Mr. Plant Geek, who is obviously a big social media user, and he was saying he doesn't think the amount of time you spend on it reflects in the amount of rewards you get from it, and that even just a few minutes a day can get, you know, nearly as much rewards as putting your whole life and heart and soul into it.
Yeah, 100%. And those that Mrs. Hinch group of people, like, will they stay within gardening? You know, that trend conscious, health conscious, will they stay within the gardening now, or will they move back into the house again after the lockdown, or how can we
Yeah,
keep them?
I think we stand a lot more chance now. They've had a full year around the clock. When I first gave the presentation, I think you mentioned the ICL recording last summer. They'd only done sort of 5 or 6 months, and I was thinking this is going to be a big, big ask. But I think we've got a real chance now. They've done a full lap of the gardening calendar to turn what was sort of a short-term distraction into a long-term hobby. But I think it relies on people outside of the industry as well. You know, I think quite a lot of times when I say these sort of things, brands talk about getting influencers involved, and they're looking at gardening influencers, but this is in the hands of sort of lifestyle influencers, and like Mrs. Hinch and the Stacey Solomon and Joe Lycett, you know, the comedian Joe Lycett tweets loads about gardening. And I think it's as much a case of keeping those sorts of people on side, as it is, you know, it's not just a one person responsibility. It's everyone needs to keep it interesting and exciting and engaging. Um, so I think it's a challenge, but I think it's definitely doable. And I think worst case, we don't keep them on side now. We've caught up that lost time where they never had the childhood exposure to gardening. And one day when they, you know, I don't want everyone to go back to waiting for people to age into gardening, but at least they have had the initial exposure now, the happy memories. This, you know, I think gardening has been such difficult times in the last year, and gardening has offered a salvation to that, and I think that will be remembered, even if it doesn't sort of like continue immediately and smoothly through. So yeah, I hope so. I think the people that the other group that we spoke about, the sort of the plant parents, the sustainable gardeners kind of things, I think we stand a really good chance of keeping them, and I do think it's the more influenceable group that we spoke about, the garden decorators, that are more volatile,
Yeah, yeah,
hopefully.
yes. And what recommendations would you give a horticulture business or a garden center that, you know, wouldn't have the maybe the labor force or the time scale or the budget to start a digital marketing campaign? Like, what small things could they do to reach out to customers and
That's a really good question. I think that, you know, to have an Instagram account and a Facebook page is free. Um, and like I say, I would be taking the photos anyway to send them around the buyers or upload them to the web shop or whatever it is. So I don't think that anybody can say they can't afford it really. In terms of having some form of presence, and as I said before, I think some form of presence has significantly more value than no presence at all. Um, I just don't think we can afford not to, with the way that the consumer is changing. And as I mentioned in the discussion, I think it will continue to change more. I think this person is more like the people we will get in the futures, even though they're vastly different from the people we've had before. Um, I think I've felt I've been quite vocal about that. I think that now is the time to invest in marketing, which can feel quite counterintuitive when we've just had, well, we have as a bedding nursery, an absolute battering of a year. It can feel quite, yeah, we should be protecting ourselves, not spending, you know, more money to try and build through it. But I think it's just, I just think it's the only way we're gonna win this one.
yeah,
um and you know, they're not immediately, even once they're allowed, they're not immediately going to be crawling around garden centres looking for the information. But if you've got that opportunity to get it onto their phone in front of them and make them feel like it's something they absolutely need, then that's worth 100 adverts in the local newspaper or however it is used to advertise. It's sort of like a collective industry responsibility, like to brand. I spoke about brand horticulture. And I think that's both a blessing and a curse that, if we advertise a certain plant, various other nurseries that sell it will also benefit from us doing so. But I just think that collaboration is required. Basically, everyone needs to take responsibility for their own portion of chipping in, but it is a collective, collaborative project as brand horticulture to keep ourselves attractive.
Yes, for sure. I'm a massive advocate of digital marketing. I've been citing it for a long time at home in the family business, and we've seen the full advantage of it last year when we had the first lockdown in April, like, and we had to close the gates, like, and resort to click and collect, like, and we've seen astronomical drive on the Facebook page, like, it was unbelievable how many people went onto Facebook and
Yeah,
were using us and watching videos or watching or reading our posts and just buying plants. Like, we'd seen customers that we'd never seen before. I think we had maybe 300 or 500% more customers in the space of 6 weeks than
yeah,
we would have all year. Like, and I think it's can only be beneficial for the horticulture industry to
yeah.
move towards digital marketing and using it to its full advantage. Like, and
Yeah. Do you find the same as we do, that the old customer, if we were selling, say, a 6 pack of Impatiens, if that ever went above 2.99, they would be out with their pitchforks protesting. Even though our costs have gone up, we look at catalogs from 1994 and we were charging more for a plant then than we were now. And I really do feel like that new customer. I had a friend who was selling 6 pack cyclamen on Amazon for 12.99 a pack.
yeah,
And I was just like, and they were selling hundreds of units a day. And it's just, I think if you are struggling to justify the expenditure on social media, then the opportunity to gain a better margin at the other end should be a consideration as well, because they really don't have that sort of set in stone perceived value. They just know they want something, and whatever the price tag is instrumental.
yeah, yeah. We found that last year as well during the lockdown with the new customer. We could charge an extra maybe 50 cent to a euro on each plant that we wouldn't normally get from the
Yeah.
older customer that we'd always had, like, and just made more use of that, like, and it was a bit of an issue at times, like, because we had the older customer coming up and asking why was this plant a bit more now, but I guess the quality was there and the demand was there, so we played into that, I guess, in some ways and allowed to make up that money, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, what are your thoughts on like the other social medias like YouTube and the likes of those as well? Do you think there's a use for them in the horticulture, digital
Yeah,
marketing?
I think there definitely is. I think I briefly touched on, I think the sort of how-to videos, and when you're getting into that level of detail, it is for a different audience than for our bedding plant customer. I think the modern bedding plant customer doesn't really want projects, they just want decorations. But I think when you look at, that houseplant customer, they want the complex stuff. One of the most impressive houseplant projects I've seen is a girl over here called the Rare Plant Shop, and the cheapest plant she sells is 130, 140 quid. And there's stuff like she'll sell Monstera oblique seedlings for 1700 pounds. It's just crazy, but she has it dramatized. It's like buying Glastonbury tickets. There's a countdown timer at the top. Next plants will be released in this long. Everything's black. It's just real drama around it. But every plant she sells comes with a video by her, and she's quite a good-looking girl and knows this stuff. And she records these videos of how to get this plant to have its best possible life and be the best parent to this plant you could possibly be. And I think the complexity is there with, that high ticket item, and that person who wants that to be able to say that they've got it, and hashtag it's normally variegated monsteras, isn't it? That they all collect, and to be part of that club that owns that plant and has got it ticked off on the rare plant list. And I think it's more, YouTube for me is more in line with that sort of customer, or someone who's taking on a whole project, rather than the bedding customer. Um, Same with TikTok. I can't even pretend I know how it works, but I believe it's quite effective in terms of getting people involved in challenges, and yeah, I think it is just drawing the line between those two customers, and we as a bedding nursery will be staying on the ones I understand, which is convenient, but the ones that are most effective to our consumer.
Yeah, that's all the questions. I'll just see if Kieran has any questions, if he wants to drop in and see if he has anything he would like to add.
So, Natalie, I enjoyed your presentation very much. Thank you. A couple of questions. Do you give out any free offers or free plants on your Facebook page, or to encourage people to share to promote user numbers?
We did sort of giveaways, but more share to win. So we did a big hamper at Christmas, and yeah, they are very effective. And I think if you consider, if we did 2 planted containers, it might cost us 15, £18. But if you looked at, how the buying that amount of customers or advertising to that amount of customers in terms of the reach those posts get compared to organic reach, then it's again, it's a bit like I said earlier. It's 100 newspaper adverts for 18 quid if you were trying to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So another question is, if people are buying your plants in garden centres or privately, do you do any homemade videos of the plants growing, or can they actually see the plants online that they are buying apart from photographs?
It's something that we're really looking into, and something that I've been looking at on a larger industry scale as well, whether we could have sort of like one database where different growers can upload different content, and sort of like a bank of things to post for garden centres, and because you don't need to re-record it every year. So if we could create like a library of those sort of, it's St. David Days, here's some nice pictures of a nursery full of daffodils, or whatever it is, that would hold huge value. And as I said before, these marketing projects that feel like you're helping your competitors are actually helping brand horticulture. It's definitely something that I always intend to do, but I am guilty of getting tied down in the day to day. I think this is something about horticultural businesses that are generally family businesses and, owner operator kind of businesses, and it's quite easy to get tied down in the daily running of the business and never get that chance to step back and consider the bigger picture. But it's something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about and hoping to do something about, and hopefully at some point I will find time to. But definitely it's a stupendous idea to have, those sorts of nursery projects and time lapses of crops growing. Something that the old railway line garden centre in Brecon in Wales do really well, and they've actually booked to come and see us next month to help us put together some videos of some crops on the nursery to share with all garden centres. So
Yeah.
in the pipeline.
Very good. One final question, not directly related to digital marketing. What's your big worry for your business going forward in the short term?
I'm quite optimistic about the short term. Call me naive. I think we've got issues about the tightening of plant passport and plant health legislations, and the costs. More than, I don't have issues with it happening. I agree that there's probably grounds for it to happen, but the cost implications and how we ever feed those through to the customer is hard. I think this year there's going to be massive supply versus demand issues. And obviously, what's the implications of not fulfilling the demand? Do people get bored of not being able to get hold of things and give up, or do they effectively create like a black market level of demand for them and become, even more popular? I think that there's issues at the moment with acquisition of goods in terms of the supply chain, but I think they will hopefully resolve themselves soon. In terms of getting hold of plastics. Now I've got to the point. I think my actual answer should be peat, though.
Yes, very interesting. Yes.
Yeah. That's terrifying, especially in bedding, and especially, well, I don't want to start a whole other conversation, but I would be very worried that a lot of the alternatives were being pushed towards that when they get the full analysis of their actual carbon footprint and ecological impact aren't any better for a more expensive, less consistent product. So it's sort of, I absolutely understand that peat's a huge issue, but I don't think you can ban it without having an alternative that stands up to its level, or any, it's that's going to be a very careful ground to tread moving forward. And I think that's probably the industry's biggest threat in terms of our reputation could be damaged by that quite badly if it's handled improperly.
Thank you, Natalie. That was the actually the answer I was wondering about peat, and it is a major concern over here going forward, both in the short term and long term. Not alone that, for across horticulture, across all the sectors of horticulture. So, and if we are struggling with it here in Ireland, they'll definitely be struggling with it in the UK also. And wider, with big implications. Okay, I'll hand back to you, Conor.
Yep, thank you. Just before we wrap things up, I'd like to draw your attention to a grant that is available. You can have a look at it. One minute I get it shared here. If any of you are interested in developing your digital marketing. So it's a COVID-19 micro business e-commerce grant, and I believe that there's grants up to £5,000 to support 80% of the eligible costs, and this can cover development and online sales. So something that they talked about, a web shop, to improve in your social media presence and developing social media sites for selling on as well. And I will drop you the link to this along with the recording of the webinar, and you can check it out if anyone of you are interested in that. And that is the webinar. To finish the webinar, again, I would like to thank you, Natalie, for taking time out of your very busy schedule, as we were discussing at the start there, that you are getting warmed up for the season and heading into a busy time of the year. So thank you very much for that, and thanks for providing a very insightful and informative webinar on the digital marketing and the changing consumer in horticulture. I'm sure everyone has got something out of it, and something that they can apply to their own horticulture business and make use of, especially in light of the time that we're in as well, with the lockdowns and COVID, and how people are trying to sell their products as well. So I hope that it was been found useful, and thank you again, and we'll be in touch, I guess.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Well, Conor, or just waiting for people to leave?
Yeah, I'll just stop the recording.